Hello, it's me, Leo. I'm back again with one of these little videos that I like to make. New facial hair combo with the head hair length as always. I'm just, I don't know, trying different stuff out. So this video I make to celebrate having over 50 subscribers. Who knew it? Thank you all so much for watching. It's a start, and I'm always an advocate for celebrating every milestone as they come, as I'm going to talk about today, because this video is about, it's just tips that I've picked up on how to create. Mostly as a writer, because I've been writing longer than I have been making films, but a lot of it applies to filmmaking as well, as you'll see. So I've got several tips, and I'm just going to go through them. So my very first tip is just to get it done. Lots of people come to the club, and they seem to want, understandably, a bit of info before they start filming something, or being in front of a camera, or being the sound person, or whatever it is. But I often don't give that guidance. I often just tell them to do something in a couple of settings, press play and give it a go. But the reason I do that is because I want to build up a kind of individual self-reliance upon that person, and also just the notion of doing something while not really knowing what you're doing is par for the course when you're creating something. So it's actually something to become accustomed to. So that's something that you pick up the longer you do this, that there's never really a time where you go, I know exactly what I'm doing. So getting used to the feeling of doing something while not knowing what the hell you're doing, it's a very useful skill as a creator. So get it done is my first tip. You've seen films before, make one of those. You've read stories before, write one of those. I'm making this video in exactly the same style. I have a script right here with me, but I'm also ad-libbing as I see fit. And I think creativity is kind of both of those things. It's planning, and it's also just trying stuff out. But of course, here I am filming this today. Who knows what I would say if I filmed this in a year? You know, there would always be some way that I could refine it, some little thing that I could fix, and so the notion of just making something really is about accepting imperfection. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is the notion that you're not going to make something perfect. And that's another thing that you need to get accustomed to when you're making things. You won't. That's not the point. Lots of people, when they get started, myself included, fall into what I call the single idea trap. It's the very first time you get an idea, you get so attached to it because you've never really had one before. You think there must be something special or maybe even divine about this idea that you have, and you must put all your energy into this one idea, and you have to make this the best thing ever. The very first thing you make has to be your magnum opus. Who knows why it would be? I mean, it almost never is. Who knows why you would have to do that in order to be, I don't know, considered worthwhile as a creator. But it is a trap that falls on all of us, and it fell on me also. Just want to show you something. This book here, putting it right beside my face so that it's also in focus. I don't know, is it focus here? Not really. There, not really either. Yeah, exactly, right here. Is a book that I spent like 8 years writing. I didn't spend all 8 years on it. I didn't only write this. So it was 8 years on and off. But the reason I spent so long on it, firstly, it was the first real idea that I had. And so I got this really intense feeling that I had to get it done properly. And so that's why I didn't really let it go. That's why I stuck with it until it was done. But that kind of thing can hold you back, because while I was creating other things, I was always doing it with the idea that I would be building the skills to come back and tell the story of this book. And eventually it got to the point where I would be writing new stories and very close to stealing ideas from this book itself. And it was hampering me to the point where I really wanted this story to appear in this form. But obviously there was like a need in me to get these specific ideas out into the world that was competing with being able to present this book as it was. I could have held on to it indefinitely. I could hold on to any book idea I have indefinitely until it's, because there's always something more you could say, but there is a point where you have to just release it into the world And I wonder, obviously everything I do is the best thing I can do at the time. I wonder how this will stack up to the other things that I make, because I don't trust that feeling that this was my one idea and that this was the best idea I'd ever have. And I'm glad it's over with. I'm glad that's gone. I'm glad I'm on to the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever idea, because they just keep coming. The ideas just keep coming. I think when you first start to have them, you feel like, oh wow, finally an idea has been bestowed upon me. I must treat this with care. But adopting the notion that you're going to examine these ideas with scrutiny is a better tactic, I think, because you will have endless ideas. And accepting that is the first step to having all those endless ideas. And the alternative to that is being so stuck on the notion of this very first idea being so amazing a thing that you never get to creating anything else. I'm going to say that everything I say in this video is not really... I don't expect everyone just to accept it and then get over all the things I'm talking about. I think that you also, like me, will have to go through all of these things, and then maybe you'll watch this video in the future and go, oh, that's what he was talking about. I've just gone through that now. Okay, great, I recognize that. I don't imagine that giving this advice will stop you from doing exactly the same things I did, because I'm not very good at listening to anyone. If you've listened to what I just said and you were like, but Leo, my first idea is this brilliant thing that has to be perfect. I'm the exception to this thing that you're talking about. Fine, but build up other ideas in the background so that you can build the skills to do this one idea. You can do justice to that one idea. But I'm going to bet that these other things that you develop in the background to build your skills are going to become more interesting and become better work than this one idea you think you need to get out. So tip number 2 is focus on the story. When it comes to filmmaking, I thought I was biased in pointing this one out because I obviously started as a writer, so that's just pure story. There's no visuals, there's no sounds. You can write he heard something or she smelled something. You can involve the senses in a story, but it's just words. It's, and there's writing that goes very descriptive, and there's stream of consciousness writing. But for me, the appeal is always the story. But then when I came to watching lots of videos on YouTube from other filmmakers and cinematographers, people who you would expect would get caught up in the visual aspects of film, they also come back to the story. So I think that this is something that most people with sense come around to thinking is the case, is that the story is the point. If I watch something, it's really the technical skills that I feel are lacking. It's not something that I pay as much attention to. It's the story. It's why is this film, what does this film mean? Why has it been made? And no matter what you're making, I think that should be the main focus, because it's the reason everyone showed up that day. It's the reason you picked up the camera in the first place, was to tell a story about something. But like I say, filmmaking being more obviously a visual or auditory medium, people can get caught up in the sound of things or the visuals of the things, but they are always secondary in importance, I think. I also think that storytelling skills are the thing that takes the longest to develop. I think it takes longer to have something original and interesting to say about life than to learn how a camera works or how to light a scene appropriately. But for me, so long as the story is compelling, I will forgive the lighting and the sound and the image quality. But like I say, a lot of filmmaking comes from the visuals first. A lot of advice is on how to make things look beautiful, because I think that a lot of general filmmaking advice is geared towards commercial purposes, like real estate or Instagram promo or wedding videography. Those are things you want to look beautiful, but there are many ways you can make something look. You can make something look ugly, you can make it look scary. There are many different types of stories to tell, and that's a bit more expansive than the standard advice. Third tip, if you can call it a tip, is to be original. Of course you should want to do that. How is that really a tip? Me saying that doesn't really help it happen, but let me explain why I bring it up. I really think the number one thing that holds people back is not innate talent, it's not applying themselves, it's the quality of their ideas. And as I've already said, you can get you can get stuck on the notion of a single great idea, which really interrupts the flow of many ideas from which you should be selecting the highest quality. When you start, if you start writing something, you start filming something, you're going to make something that's not very good. There's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is often brought up in this case. You can Google it, I won't go too much into the details, but essentially, once you start something, you're so unskilled in it, you can't even properly self-evaluate the quality of your own work. What that means is that you write something that is bad and you think it's great. When I first discovered that this was happening to me, because I would write stories and send them out and people would not have the same reaction to it that I had, it was kind of scary, because if writing means as much to you as it does to me, then you're really expressing it's how you most deeply expressed yourself. And I wasn't doing it well. It's like there are things inside you that you want to express, but you can't get them out. But wouldn't it be worse if you just stayed there? If you didn't develop your skills, then that's where you would always be, in that state of being filled with interesting things that you can't get out. You start out and it's like the emperor's new clothes, because you're walking around thinking that everyone must bask in your splendor when really there's no substance there whatsoever. Building skills in anything is a very humbling thing, because you have to go through so many stages of realizing that there's further to go and that you're not where you thought you were. But the alternative is staying where you are. So there's really no avoiding it. The best way to get better is just to make some crap. That was actually what I said to my friend when we came up with the idea of a filmmaking club. We thought, okay, cool, if we want to get better as filmmakers, then what we should do is make some crap, so let's go out there and make stuff that isn't very good. So that's my advice to you. If you want to be original, start making bad things, and then make better things. Because when people start out, like, people are very excited to tell me their ideas, and it's like, Leo, can we get together and recreate this joke from an old sitcom? Or, Leo, like, vaporwave lighting is really popular, can we light something like that? Of course there are limits to how original you can be, but I wouldn't hit my influences so on the nose as that. Because I think that by deliberately jumping onto bandwagons, you're kind of squandering your chances of doing something new. So that's often where people start out, is unoriginally, and that's fine. Often what they do is they'll take a piece of conventional wisdom, and that will be the message of their film. Like, maybe it's charity begins at home, or I am my brother's keeper, and that's going to be the point that the film is making. But they're not challenging that point, they're just presenting it as if it is true. So it's not really adding to an existing pool of common sense or conventional wisdom or allegories or whatever, because it doesn't have anything new to add to it. I do think that a good story can come from any starting point. It can be a very interesting character that you want to see do something, it can be a really cool setting, it can be a really cool story idea, and then you need to decide who it's going to happen to. It can be a message that you want to convey. That can be the starting point, but by developing an idea, you might end up somewhere completely different. So you may well believe that charity begins at home, you may well believe that we should be kinder to one another. I totally agree, but make your case. Start there, challenge that idea with your story, put it to the test. And if that is the outcome in the end, fine. But I want to see somebody go through something first. I want to see them overcome obstacles. I want to see that you've put some thought into the notion that the theory that you started off with, the hypothesis, might not be the case. Or maybe your story explores a situation in which you need to act in a way that you might need to act, or someone might need to act in a way that is completely against their values. If you think that you know how to act in all situations, I don't know that you're willing to make yourself uncomfortable enough to produce something of value, in my opinion. But that all comes later. What I say is just practice. Make something of any level of quality and improve upon it. Have a starting point of your own that you can refine and to look back on and track your own progress. Make progress from an unoriginal starting point. That's absolutely fine as a place to begin, but you need to move somewhere else eventually. So I'm not going to call these ideas bad or lazy. I don't mean to suggest that, because when you start they're exciting and they take effort to develop, at least while you're still learning, and I was that person too. So that's fine. That's absolutely normal. I mean, you can even look at the work on this channel and see that some days I just made sure that I was working on anything, something, to improve my skills. of any level of quality, because all practice counts no matter what comes out. If it's not great, it's on this. It's helping you reach a stage where you will be able to make something great eventually. So, you know, as a writer, just if writing is what you want to get better at, write anything. Any kind of practice is going to help you. As a filmmaker, like, you're involving other people's time. You may spend some money on it, so you might want to write out a whole bunch of different story ideas and then film the best of, say, the 50 that you come up with. That sounds tough. It is tough. Filmmaking is sometimes tough, but it's always rewarding and meaningful. Unfortunately, that means that just because it's fun doesn't mean you're doing the right thing. What we crave is novelty. We want new things. Though, of course, when you start as a filmmaker, you just want something that has a coherent beginning, middle, and end. Everything is in order, and the camera's pointed in the right direction, and the sound is pretty good, and the acting is passable, and it has a message. If you've gotten that far, that is so worth celebrating. That takes a lot of work, but it doesn't mean that the message is interesting, or it's your message, or the thing is in your voice. It's a definite milestone to celebrate, but you're maybe not yet at the stage where you have something interesting enough for a general audience, even if you are on the way to making something interesting for a general audience. Like, sometimes people will come to me with an idea and they'll say, can we do a Wes Anderson thing? No, I'm gonna say no, we can't. He can do a Wes Anderson thing, because he invented it. We can do Wes Anderson meets someone else, or meets like 10, 20, 100 others. Now we're in the ballpark. It becomes original through a multitude of influences. But where do you find these hundreds or maybe thousands of others that you're supposed to be influenced by? It's by developing your taste. I mean, do you know how many horror writers there are who are trying to be the next Stephen King? I don't, but I would guess it's like 10,000 or more. In which case, if you want to do that, you have to get in line behind them, and you're in position like 10,001 to be the next Stephen King. But if you add 2 other influences to that, now you've made something new. Now you're at the top of the line. It's also not the best idea to be tempted to think that your encyclopedic knowledge of what is out there necessarily means that you're very good at producing something good. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Recently, I watched The Exorcist with a friend, and we get to the scene where it's towards the end of the film, and everyone's got their breath is fogging up while they're inside to demonstrate that there's some sort of evil that's made the room really cold. And I said, oh, did you know that this scene was filmed inside a giant fridge? My friend goes, yeah, I did. And to me, I was kind of thinking, the fact that I know this fact is like, demonstrates that I have this unique interest in film and unique collection of information, when in fact he already had it. And the more I thought about it, I was like, how does that even help me become a good filmmaker, knowing that they did that? All it tells me is how one director with one story found one unique creative solution to create one desired effect. It's inspirational, but I may never do that. And even if I did build a set inside a giant fridge, people would go, Leo's doing that thing from The Exorcist. It doesn't really help you be original. Filmmaking is solving these unique creative solutions, and so you may be inspired by and you may borrow from the existing pool of knowledge and the existing ways in which people have solved creative solutions, but ultimately there will be a great number of them that you need to solve using your own creativity. And I think you should definitely allow for the idea that you do have something unique to say, and that there are any number of the ways in which films are made that you could adapt and do in your own way. And that's how you could add to this art form. I've written, and continue to write, a lot of material that doesn't reflect my best work. I do so in I write bad stuff less often, I would say. And I know more how to develop bad stuff into good stuff over the years. My cutoff age is 29. If I wrote it before 29, I won't send it out again without having another look at it. Because when I started to send out stuff at that age, with some minor edits, it ended up in pretty cool publications. And before then, if I wrote it before 29, I'm not saying it isn't good. I'm saying that if it was good, it was more up to chance than skill. So that means I was writing on and off for about 7 years before I got to what I consider a consistent level of quality. And that's quite typical, unfortunately. I always like to think of myself as exceptional or different, but in this case I'm not. It took me a very long time. It might take you a long time as well. That's why it's important to celebrate along the way, as I'll talk about later. What's interesting is when I do revisit older work that hasn't gotten published yet, I find that there is still like something buried in there that I was trying to say that I just didn't have the skills to get out. I thought I got it out and I didn't. And then I go back and I make sure it does say the thing that I meant to say. So very little of what you make will ever feel like a waste, you know? All of it is progress. And like I talk about trying to find these many different influences in order to help you become original. I would also say that when I have ideas, none of them feel original, even if they are. I think that what is original about them is the combination of hundreds and thousands of these different decisions that go into producing any story. It's not the originality of any one idea, but the originality of the formulation as a whole. There are very few stories of mine in which you will find an original word, for example. All the words in most of my stories you will find in other stories, but it's the original combination of them that makes it mine. So now I feel like I'm developing original material, but writers often say it takes between 500,000 to 1 million words before you're making something that's like your own voice and is very good. Who knows how many hours you need to put into filmmaking to do the same. But don't worry about it, make sure you're enjoying making progress. I would also say that when I have ideas, none of them feel original, even if they are. I think that what is original about them is the combination of hundreds and thousands of these different decisions that go into producing any story. It's not the originality of any one idea, but the originality of the formulation as a whole. There are very few stories of mine in which you will find an original word, for example. All the words in most of my stories you will find in other stories, but it's the original combination of them that makes it mine. This video, I think, is a very good example of that. I don't know that I'm really saying anything that isn't available already, but I am saying it in my own original combination and in my own way, and I think that has a lot of value. Like, I taught English for a year. Sometimes there would be specific like grammar tips or tenses or something that I was introducing to a class that was totally new, and I had to think of 2, 3, 4 different ways to explain it to make sure that it clicked in the heads of everyone in the class. And you would see, okay, these 4 get this explanation, but there's still another 4 in the class who need a different explanation, and you keep going until you can see it click in everyone's mind. And so I hope that what I'm doing now is producing something that is existing info presented in a new way that might click in the brains of new people. Okay, so all of that sounds pretty scary and like a lot of work, but there are loads of advantages to this also. I think that the more time you spend making stuff, the more you realize that you weren't doing as badly as you thought. Because there are also ways that you were doing things correctly by accident that you figure out later. And then the more you realize what you're doing that's correct, the more you can do it on purpose. So this, I think, goes back to the Dunning-Kruger effect again, is that your ability to self-evaluate improves the more you make things. And then you're able to notice the things you were doing that were correct. It's just that earlier you did things correctly out of chance rather than skill. And that also means that you may be surprised by how fast you make something of value. Because as much as technology is advancing, as much as even I can get caught up in what the latest camera is and who's doing what technique and what's best, we also have a really high tolerance for low quality video. About every day I'll watch like half an hour's worth of TikToks made by teenagers on their phone, in which like when the men want to play their girlfriends or mothers, they put a dishcloth on their head, and it's hilarious if they're doing something new. I don't even think they have a director of photography for those. So it's funny when they make an original joke. It's not funny when one person copies the joke of somebody else, but maybe they're on the road to making an original TikTok. Who knows? I think when you start, you're not going to be terribly confident. You're going to think, others must really know what they're doing, and where's the info that I can find that's going to help me feel as confident as they must be? You might think, why am I not getting any more help? And I think what you learn is that the info you need to feel comfy doesn't exist, and the help you want doesn't exist either, because you're making something new. You're making something in your own style, which is something that ultimately nobody can help with. They can guide, they might give good guidance sometimes, but never always. So you achieve a kind of paradoxical feeling of confidence in that you become accustomed to the feeling of making things while not knowing what you're doing and without help. The alternative to getting comfy with that feeling is just making things like everyone else does, even if it doesn't fit. But this brings me on to point number 4. There are no rules. This is a point I like to challenge myself on to see if there is something I could say is going to apply in every situation, like, you should point the camera at the person who is talking. Nope. When you film close-ups, you should film them with a shallow depth of field to make the background blurry. Not always. There are reasons you might not want to do that. You know, you should use this camera setting and that camera setting always for this kind of application. Never. It's always going to depend on what you're doing. You should allow for the fact that your style may involve breaking any or all rules that you've ever heard. This is something that I picked up from a book called The Art of Memoir by Mary Karr, and it's about how to write memoirs. And she comes up with at the end of each chapter there are a list of rules, and she says that exact thing. Be aware that in order to develop your own style, you may need to break any and all of these supposed rules. And I think the same goes for any artistic medium. You should always allow for the possibility that you may need to film something in an unconventional style. You know, rule of thirds, 180 degree rule, 30 degree rule. I've broken them all. Accidentally, on purpose. Is it a big deal or not? It really depends on what's happening in the scene. I think you should evaluate what you're making with the possibility, like I say, that there are certain principles you may need to deviate from. As a writer, there are only a handful of people that I take feedback from. I've always been kind of sensitive to it, wary of it. As a filmmaker, I've received a lot more of it because I'm usually in the room with the person who's experiencing the thing that I've made, which is not typically the case as a writer. And if people are very excited by what you're making, they'll have a lot to say and they'll want to offer their improvements. I often find that ideas that are suggested as improvements can boil down to, if I made this, I would have made it in a different way. Which is probably, you know, of course that's true, that's absolutely fine. But it doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong. Maybe you were doing it in your own style. Maybe you were doing it in a way that resonates with a different type of person. So that's another thing I think I've learned, is that I was always afraid that I wasn't accepting enough feedback and maybe that was holding me back. But now that I have accepted more feedback, I notice that there's a limit even in the ways that other people can guide you in what you're doing. And again, you go back to, wow, I really don't feel like I know what I'm doing. And that's okay. So if it is not a question of simply learning the rules and then applying those rules in order to improve, how does one improve? That brings me to point number 5. Practice and life experience. These are the two things I think most improve creative work. It's not how many films you've seen, it's not how many books you've read, it's not whether or not you feel like you were born for this, it's how much you practiced and what's been going on in your life. So I think what I'm trying to do is demystify the process, but it simply gets mystified again in a different way. You start looking for ways to do this, and then you realize there are no ways to do this, or rather there is no one way to do this, and then you're just differently confused. I don't think I can explain how to get better more than just put the time in, and but I do promise that if you put the time in, you will see improvements. I wonder if this reluctance that I sometimes see to understand that practice will help you improve comes from this weird notion we have that if you're doing what you're supposed to do, it won't be boring or painful. There's that expression, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, I don't necessarily agree. I think if you want the satisfaction of creating something, that there's some hard graft in it. Unavoidably so, as there is with everything. Practice and life experience, you'll notice, as I mentioned, don't have much to do with how much you've seen or how much you've read. I'm always kind of suspicious of people who, as I alluded to earlier, will spout off this enormous encyclopedic knowledge of books or films, almost as if by way of you knowing how much they know about the medium, it guarantees that they must be making something good. Well, I take issue with that, because the appreciation of art, or being an art historian, these are in many respects their own discipline, which of course overlap with the creation of art, but not as much as you might think. Breaking down how other people have successfully made art can be important, but practice is what's going to help you improve the most. As for life experience, the more you learn about life, the more you are posed to say anything about it. The more things that happen to you that you don't understand, the more you'll be compelled to use art to understand it. And there are times when engaging in life will leave you confused and hurt, so I don't think you need to worry about going out there and chasing that kind of experience. I think it just comes to you through living. And by all means, when it does, use art to try and understand the world better, because I think the alternative is to become embittered and to say that, the world is cruel and disappointing, so that's what I'll be. Great, you fixed it. In something I wrote recently, there's a character of mine who talks about how he knew he wanted to get married. And it happens to be the exact way that I would articulate how I knew I wanted to get married. And so I was able to gift that observation to a character from having experienced it in real life. But the weird thing about writing these things that are self-evident to you is it doesn't really feel like you're doing anything at all. You're just articulating things that you already knew to some extent, and yet that can be the most valuable thing that you do. So, the more you experience of life, the more you can gift that to your characters, and the more you can use that to shape your stories. Which means that what I consider the most important thing about storytelling is happening right now, automatically. Point number 6, which I've already brought up, is that you need to celebrate your successes. The very first video I ever rendered, I filmed some cars passing under a bridge on my phone. Then I took that file off my phone onto my laptop, I stuck it in DaVinci Resolve, and then I rendered it back out. So it was exactly the same thing that I put in that came out, because I was too afraid to touch any of the other features in DaVinci Resolve. I was, convinced I was going to mess it up somehow, and I was amazed that I managed to get something out as I expected, even though I hadn't made any changes to it. That was a huge success for me that day. Obviously I've gotten better, but only as a result of continuing to practice. And I've only carried on by silently celebrating those things by myself and being very proud of myself. Next thing I did was, I think I recorded myself on my phone using a different microphone, and then I synced those two clips in DaVinci Resolve, and I watched it back, and I looked at myself, and I listened to my own voice, and then it came out with all the specifications that I needed of it. That was like another 2 weeks worth of effort. So these were enormous milestones for me, but I hadn't yet achieved any level of ability that allowed me to make anything of value to anyone else. And the same is true for building skills in anything, really. Is at the very beginning especially, you're going to have to celebrate a lot of things that are victories for you, but not necessarily yet for others. So it's another good practice just to learn to motivate yourself, to generate some sort of internal motivation. Because you may well get recognition from friends and family at first, of course. They're going to be proud of you if you're building skills, if you've got nice friends and family around you. The wider world probably won't really care. Maybe ever. I don't know. Is that the point? I think that in order to get good, you have to create so much stuff unseen by the wider world that by the time they care, it's just kind of interesting and curious and a bonus. Yeah, I'm afraid I do find it difficult to imagine that anyone will be terribly excited for you that you're starting this new skill, especially if it's something like filmmaking. I mean, who doesn't love films nowadays? Who doesn't watch so much Netflix and YouTube and so on? We all love it to some extent. By all means, be passionate about it. Work hard at generating skills in this, if you find it personally rewarding. Don't focus too much on external validation. Point number 7, I think is the most important point. So I don't know why it is point number 7, it just feels like it fits here. Be a nice person. Please. Please. Oh my god. Earlier I said that storytelling skills take longer to develop than technical skills, because I feel like it takes longer to say something original about life than it does to learn how to pick up a camera. Similarly, I think being a good person is tougher than developing technical skills. This point is mostly for filmmakers because as a writer, of course, you can work in isolation, you can write lovely things and be a horrible person if you want. Not so much anymore because the reclusive author days are kind of over and you do need to be a bit more interpersonal than authors have had to be in the past, but as a filmmaker, definitely, you're working as a team. It's really going to help things if you're kind. Filmmaking is inherently collaborative, and don't I sometimes wish it wasn't, because one thing that's tougher than telling an original story is dealing with other people. This point I think is contentious because there are so many mythologized stories about people going mad making a film and the madness appearing in the final product, and that being part of why it's such a great film, or directors bullying great performances out of their actors. I think the appeal of these stories is that they are the exceptions. From my experience, really, in all aspects of life, kindness, patience, and professionalism are going to help. Even if they don't get the best results, why would you not just be like that anyway? I think it's more important. Though I really do think it is the best way to go, because I've seen it. But the narrative isn't often that kind people are the ones who succeed. The reason I think this is because people who are mean or aggressive or plan to bully good performances out of people, they have blind spots to how their behaviour is affecting others negatively. So they can't reliably comment on the effectiveness on their attitude because they can't see the harm that it's creating. But from the outside, you can see how people like that repel other people and close doors for themselves. They're just so pleased with themselves at the time that they can't see it happening. Part of directing, I found, is definitely managing ego at times. When I'm directing something, I'm not saying it's because I'm the most knowledgeable person in the room, or that I'm better than anyone else. I am saying that unless decisions come from a centralized point, something is not going to get made. That's all I'm saying. There needs to be a central coordinator to all the creative decisions, because everyone has a different attitude about how it should get done. Therefore, if something is going to get done, it should all come from one person, one small, select, trusted team. The same goes for this filmmaking club that I started. When I started it, I didn't have any filmmaking experience, but it didn't exist. That's why I started it. I wasn't saying, I'm not saying somebody else couldn't have done it. I'm saying nobody else had done it. But when you tend to take these kind of initiatives, some people can see it as you thinking that you're better than them. There are certain people who are natural leaders, and therefore they're not as good team players. And so even when they are in a team, they tend to draw more attention to themselves simply because they're used to being in a leadership role. Sometimes they do it because they know more than me. Again, I'm not saying that the leader is the person who knows the most, and that's fine, but often they so enjoy the feeling of leading or instructing other people that they say things that are incorrect. And my strategy is to let them. Which, you can choose your own strategy for it, but the reason I just let them is because if you challenge them or say, actually, that's not true, you're just going to exacerbate what's happening, which is the exercising of their ego. Which means that this attitude that they have, that they are very important, no more than other people, and are helping them, it's actually actively detrimental. There are many times when somebody has told me, trust me, Leo, it has to be done this way. It can't be done in another way. I know, I've examined all options. Then I found a different way to do it. Then if you do it in a different way that's more efficient or easier or cheaper or whatever, they take it as an insult. Because you having found another way is you not trusting them when they said they knew best. Even though you've proven that they didn't necessarily know best. This kind of ego management, as I call it, is distracting and time consuming and gets in the way of the main goal of making something good. But I don't mean to sound like I judge people like this, I really don't. Because I think we're all susceptible to doing things like this sometimes. Of course we are. If you're listening to this and thinking, I've behaved that way, well, so have I. I think that if I'm particularly hungry or very tired, I feel like, why am I not the king of art yet? And then I'll eat something or I'll take a nap and then that feeling goes away. I'm not saying that I would only work with people who behave like this 0% of the time. That's unrealistic. I am saying that try not to let this kind of behavior get to such an extent that it's happening more often than it isn't, or it's significantly impacting making an interesting film, making an interesting project. The problem is when it gets too much. Not that it happens at all. It's going to happen. All kinds of weird things are going to happen. Because we're humans. We're imperfect humans making stuff while dealing with weird anxieties that are brought out by group behavior and so on. And making art, which is a very vulnerable thing to do, especially in a group of people that you don't know very well. You're going to say weird things, you're going to get mad about stuff that doesn't matter. It just happens. That's fine, I accept that. But let's try and minimize it, is all I'm saying. I find that the people who are very problematic don't survive in the environment of my club, which I find to be overwhelmingly compassionate, kind, and encouraging. I'm overwhelmed by that, and that should be the main takeaway here, is that I am very impressed by the people who come to the club, and they're very lovely, and the ones for whom it is not for tend not to come back again. Which for someone like me, I worry a lot, and I worry that problems won't get resolved without some sort of active behavior on my part. It's nice to see that there is a kind of organic collection of cool people. And I really think that, as I say, kind, encouraging, optimistic people are the ones who will succeed, ultimately. You might get something faster out of people by bullying them in the short term, but you won't get their long-term trust that way. An example in the writing world, I submit short stories a lot. I get them rejected a lot, far more often than I get them accepted. The magazines at the very, very top tend to be the most encouraging. They're very thankful that you're sending your work to them. They will give you kind and constructive feedback. They'll tell you to keep going. They'll tell you best of luck getting this published somewhere else, and they'll tell you please submit again. And they mean it. I really get the sense that they mean it, even though they might be sending this to 10,000 different authors a year, and yet they really do genuinely believe that every single one of those authors, they're thankful for the time of all of those authors, and they should all keep going, and they should all send their work elsewhere, and they should try them again. Perhaps they're not saying it to every single one of them, but they're kind to every single one of them. I know that much. That's why they're able to get so many people to submit to them. If you create an environment in which you're getting the most amount of people sending you their best work, then you can select the best of the best, and you're going to create the best quality product out of that. Not only that, you're just going to make everyone feel good and valued. Just a few more kind of challenges to working in a team. I've got two more examples I wanted to come up with. One thing that can be very common is that once a problem arises, everyone becomes very keen on you knowing it's not their fault. Not that you even asked whose fault it was. You bring up a problem because you think somebody might be able to help you solve it. All they say is, I don't know, but it wasn't me. You should have looked into that. Cheers. Great. Then the problem exists, and I feel a little worse. That's a very strange, unhelpful habit, I would say. And the last one is that, I am the first to admit that the things we make sometimes, as I've already mentioned, while they may represent our best work, they might not represent the best work available to the general population. Not yet. But I'll still go out to events and say, hey, we're going to be screening our next short film next week. Please come along and see it. I'd be really happy. If you're interested in filmmaking, you might want to. We're going to explain how we did it, and that might be of interest to you. I've done that at parties where somebody will go, somebody in the club, somebody who was maybe in that film will go, oh, it's not that big a deal. It kind of sucks. All right, well, I think that my bare minimum requirement for the people I work or hang out with is don't make it worse. And I'm surprised by how many people fail to prevent it from being worse. At the very least, I don't expect you to say this is as good as a big Hollywood blockbuster, but there's no need to be dismissive of anything that we've all worked very hard on, I think it's a good idea to practice the kind of behavior you would be doing if you were an employed professional. You would be trying to promote the thing that you made, show up on time, and so on. You might think, oh, I would only do this if I was paid, but anyone watching you has seen no evidence of you behaving well or showing up on time. So they've no reason to believe that if they started paying you, you would do those things. we really do create good opportunities for ourselves by being kind and being in our best behavior. So I'm over the mythology of filmmakers behaving badly. Okay, so a lot of information, a lot of difficult things to think about, I think. You might be wondering why I do it at all. I certainly do, a lot, still. It can be very disheartening at times, especially in the beginning when you get so many more rejections and you know your quality isn't as good as you would like it to be, and you're always finding new ways why it isn't, and yet you don't know how to make it better. That can be the toughest, I think. It's the toughest when you start out. And I don't think I ever gave serious thought to quitting. I think I did say sometimes, God, this is hard, and God, I don't know what I'm doing. I should just quit. Not really, I won't, but maybe I should. I definitely got to that point a few times. So by this point, maybe you're thinking, okay, this is how this guy thinks it should be done, but why? Why should anyone do it at all? Sometimes, when people learn that I write things or that I make films, they'll say, okay, Leo, like, sell me on the notion of making a film. Why should I go out there and do that? As if, by virtue of the fact that I do it, I would be able to explain to somebody else why they should do it. It's not true. Or another one is, I'm going to, you know, Leo's being very passionate about writing. I'm going to be the devil's advocate, and I don't imagine that he's ever given thought to the notion of how pointless it must be to write. Well, then I know you're not a writer, because that's mostly what we do, is go, oh, why am I doing this? You know, of course I've given thought to how pointless it is. In fact, that's what I'm saying. I can't give you a reason to do it. It's not up to any artist to sell the notion of making art to anyone else. There are two quotes that I really like. One is the Thomas Mann quote, "The value of my work I do not know, and you cannot tell me." Another one, James Baldwin one, it's a bit longer, so I'll just read it. If you're going to be a writer, there's nothing I can say to stop you. If you're not going to be a writer, nothing I can say will help you. If you want to do it, you'll do it. If you don't, you won't. If you don't want to do it, you shouldn't do it. There are enough people trying. My opinion on why you should do it, for what it's worth, is that you become more fulfilled as a person. There would be times when I was younger when I would watch a film by somebody who made it who was my age. This is such a typical thing as a writer or an artist that I don't know how often we talk about it. And particularly when you're younger, you're very age conscious of who's doing what. You'd watch it, and then I would just feel this, like, that feeling that it was somehow a personal insult to me that somebody else was succeeding at something I wanted to do. Really what that pain is I know there's something I want to do and I'm not doing anything about it. And if there is something you want to do, I suggest you do something about it, because then that pain will go away. And I can guarantee you that much. Can't promise you anything beyond that, but I think it's worth it just for that reason. The more fulfilled you are, the nicer it is for people to be around you. And the more skills you develop, the more posed you are to help others. So everyone benefits from you doing the things you love. Phew, okay. I'll close with this last point that I gave to a friend recently. It's just something I've been thinking about in general. Some years ago, my dad mentioned to me that he had this really funny idea for a radio play about heaven. He was like, oh, I've got all the ideas in my head, but it's very funny. And sometimes some books would appear on his shelf about like how to write a play, how to be a screenwriter, Robert McKee's story, Stephen King's On Writing, all the classics. And he would say that to me like over years. A few years would pass and he'd go, oh, I've got this, I had this idea for a radio play about heaven, but it's very funny. And he's not here anymore, so I can't tell you any more about it. I don't know how funny it is, but I do know that it doesn't exist. You know, maybe any piece of work will get lost to the ages, but the only guaranteed loss is the loss of the piece that doesn't even get brought into existence in the first place. And I think maybe that was the one idea syndrome. I won't write anything because I've got this one radio play about heaven that's very funny, and I need to make sure that when it comes out of my head it is as funny as it feels in my head. I think any creative will tell you that nothing they make looks or feels the way it feels in their head. So getting over that disconnect is a big thing. But please, if there's something you want to make, start making it now. Because otherwise you might go years talking about this one great idea you have, And then that's all the world will ever learn about it. I can't believe you made it this far. It's very kind of you. I'm so glad to have so many subscribers here. Please, if this helped you, let me know in the comments. If you want to hear me talk about anything particular, let me know. If you want to see our club do anything cool, we're all ears, and there's so many of us ready to make loads of cool stuff going into next year. Really appreciate you being here, and I hope you can look forward to so much more cool content from us. That's all from me for this video. Till next time.